So, to bring the good news that Lord Yupa is here to the castle where her father, the king, awaits, she jumps off from the cliff at once. Here again, the scene jumps from a simple dialogue to a grand view with a music like da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. A scene suddenly appears where Nausicaa carries Maeve and makes a big jump off from the cliff. Let me stand up. Look at this from the bottom to the top. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So as Nausicaa makes a big jump off the cliff, you can barely see a road below the cliff. As you follow all the way along this cliff, you can see a shiny area ahead like this. It means that this valley slowly curves toward the right. Nausicaa flies to the Valley of the Wind. The cliff to the Valley of the Wind is actually slightly curved. It's curved and Nausicaa flies along that curve. This road, as you see later when Yupa gets through, is a narrow road carved on the cliff, which is barely enough for one person to pass. Along this, Nausicaa flies by and vanishes far away. Okay, so the geography of the Valley of the Wind has almost never been... how should I say? Never been visualized before. The bottom of the Valley of the Wind cannot be viewed due to the large right turn. As you can see from the fact she jumps off from here, the acid sea that you can see almost at the last scene actually exists on a plateau about 1,000 meters above the sea level. While the Valley of the Wind is located near the sea at almost 0 meters from the sea level, at the bottom of the cliff, which is so much lower than the acid sea and the toxic jungle that are 1,000 meters above the sea level, this height difference itself is the basis of the existence of the Valley of the Wind. That's why there are 2 oceans appearing in this movie. One is a safe sea called the Salt Sea, near the Valley of the Wind from where the wind blows in. Well, even though it's a safe sea, Nausicaa and the people do not run any fishery there. So this sea is basically dead. On the other hand, from Nausicaa's side, all the way up about 1,000 meters above the valley, there is the acid sea in the desert and the toxic jungle beyond that. So they live between those 2 oceans. So please grasp the whole structure of the Valley of the Wind where they live in such a narrow space. Okay. Let me drop this to this side. Now, okay, now I can sit and talk for a while. As I mentioned earlier, Yupa goes down the hill along the narrow path carved on the cliff. Because Yupa is not on Maeve like Nausicaa, he has no choice but to walk down. So he rides a horse-like creature called Horseclaw and goes down the road along the valley. Then some dust flows like this from his feet toward the top of the cliff. So the wind blowing here is not just a wind, but contains sand. The sand blows off spores from the acid seas and the toxic jungle. It's not just a wind, but from the acid sea. As you see on the right side of this picture, miasma poisons and spores come down from the top of the mountain. Sand is added to the wind to blow them off. As Yupa descends the valley, what appears before him is a giant sand louver. This is also described in the storyboard. It means a louver to keep sand away. And there are several of these along the way. Under the louver, sand is stored. You see sand smoke rising from the lower part of the louvers, or from the bottom, right? What it does is that some of the sand comes down from the toxic jungle, and some sands come from the salt sea. But all the sand is once knocked down by the rotating wings and stored underneath. When the wind from the salt sea rises, the sand is blown up and back toward the toxic jungle. This is the system built by the Valley of the Wind over the years. Like the insect repellent tower, as you can see, the material of the tower is stone. It's a stone masonry. These wings are made of wood and cloth. And what they do is, as I said, keep the dust from the acid sea away, and at the same time blow it upward with the wind from the salt sea. According to Miyazaki's initial setting, though the village is right below here, all the villagers lived in the castle, not the village. What it means is that, until this sand louver was ready to use, everyone was often sheltered in the highly airtight castle. When something happened, everyone had to quickly escape into the castle. So that was why the castle of the Valley of the Wind was made so big. Although there are only 500 people in the valley, the castle is obviously oversized. But that's a matter of course. That's because it was also a large-scale accommodation where all the people had to shelter in for several days until the direction of the wind changed back. That's why the castle was made so big. However, because the sand louver was built, it could now somehow, how should I say, constantly blow the wind back to protect the valley. And the villagers didn't have to live inside the castle anymore. That's why Miyazaki's initial setting was not used. As Yupa moves forward, the bottom of the sand louver I just mentioned appears. Yupa looks up from below, and here you can see it in a different composition, which tells you how he has descended to the bottom of the valley. And you can also tell that each of these towers are made of stone. As you can see from this picture, the Valley of the Wind is at the bottom of the valley with a bigger height difference than you imagined. A huge shelf board is rotating. It functions to first knock down the spores and the dust that flew in from the toxic jungle, and then blow them back with the wind from the salt sea. I don't know how many years it took them to complete it, since they came up with the idea of this mechanism, but it's really terrifying to imagine their lives back then. The village could be easily wiped out just by the wind occasionally stopping or changing its direction, so everyone had to live near the castle at all times. So even when they were on farm work, they needed an alert instantly when the wind changed. They had to set up a windmill at the insect repellent tower, and when they heard the sound changing from clicking noise to ticking noise, everyone had to stop everything and run toward the castle to escape. They lived for generations and generations in this situation. Under such circumstances, they've built this village with stones little by little. That's the reason why. People in the Valley of the Wind spare no effort to secure the wind and water. When you just watch Nausicaa, you may think the villagers in Miyazaki anime are kind of boring. Everyone is good and hardworking and acts like a good person. So the villagers in his movie are like, whatever. Well, no way. The reason why everyone is a hard worker is that the life in the Valley of the Wind is poor and harsh. So lazy people can't live and cannot even survive. When they built these louvers, what they had in mind was that his huge tower, once completed, will make the village safe. But there are so many layers of them, and it's the most dangerous moment when they start building from the outside. Because if you go there, it's more likely you die early when the wind comes. Even King Jill was in the safe part of the Valley of the Wind. He quickly became ill and was going to die in just a year and a half, right? In such an environment, they work surrounded by the dust, the most dangerous substances flying from the toxic jungle. It's like working in a nuclear power plant site, surrounded by radioactive substances, and you have to do this for generations and generations to complete it. So, when they built the louvers, everyone who piled up the stones to build the tower should have died early in their youth. They knew they would die early. But if they didn't keep piling the stones up, such a thing would not be completed. My father died. I would die earlier than the others, and my little son now helping with me here will die early likewise. Unless they work for generations, they cannot build these layers of huge structures from a layer to another. But if we don't get them done, our grandchildren and their children will remain as short-lived as we do. At the expense of their ancestors' lives, these sand louvers have been built. That's why when Yupa passes by this place, he looks up with respect. It may seem to you like Yupa is thinking, oh, I've just arrived at the Valley of the Wind, it's been a long time. Yeah, well-built sand louvers, good ones. But what comes to Yupa's mind here is actually, I've passed by many ruined villages. But here the people here have worked so hard for generations and generations knowing they would die for this. That's why this village still exists. It's his admiration toward those people. Some emotional music is overlaid too. So this seemingly ordinary scene where Yupa just passes by the sand louvers becomes so impressive, and this scene always truly touches my heart. But this is also what Isao Takahata got angry about. Then make that into a picture, he says. You're thinking that far, alright? Then visualize it! But Miyazaki said, no! If I drew it, the story would not progress. Here Yupa is looking up at that way, the louvers are spinning around. This is just cool enough. Takahata was like, no, that's not enough. Here you can see the difference between Takahata, who wants to depict people, and Miyazaki, who wants to depict incidents. So for this part, we have to understand by ourselves.